Hey, I'm Sympathetic, and welcome to this walkthrough of the VI Labs Model D. I hope you're excited by that little bit that you heard in the intro because this is a really phenomenal piano sample library. In this video, we're going to talk about the highlights of this instrument, what sets it apart from everything else out there. I'll take you through the interface and show you how to navigate the instrument in both basic and advanced ways, doing little bits of playing along the way, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be well on your way to choosing your favorite presets and also customizing your tone from the ground up to fit whatever projects that you're working on. Let's start with an overview. VI Labs specializes in creating high-end piano sample libraries that don't compromise on anything. The Model D library is their most massive and ambitious to date, and it takes piano sampling to a whole new level. Now, a great sample library starts with a great instrument recorded in a great sounding space. And the Model D that was used in this session, it was not only almost never played, it was only about a year old, but a premier concert technician was a part of every moment during the sampling. So for those of you who know acoustic instruments, this technician created a custom strike point to optimize every hammer stroke. He regulated in a true Una Corda pedal, which we're going to talk more about later in the video. The voicing of each hammer across the entire instrument is incredibly consistent. And of course, the tuning is perfect. It's not just close, but it is perfect. Now, I'm mainly a classical player, and I feel like the piano used here would be like what you would expect playing on stage at Carnegie Hall. It is a pristine, flawless Model D that the finest musicians on the planet would be happy to play. And the Model D library captured that in their quietest and their largest studio that they've ever used, bringing both really intimate detail from the instrument as well as the depth and breadth of sound that only exist in larger spaces. And it brings all of that right into your home or into your studio. The Model D is a really versatile instrument, and just the default settings that load when you open it. And it's something that I think is pretty stripped down compared to what this can actually do. You already have fantastic tones. So we have some incredibly warm pianissimos and pianos. And we have some really well-balanced mezzo fortes. Yeah. And as we push into forte and fortissimo, we get that bite and that punch that take this piano from beautiful and pure into raw and strong and aggressive. So hold on to your seats for a second. Oh, let me give you a couple more of those. This is truly a pianist's virtual piano, and all of the sampling is done by hand. There are no machines, there are no robots, and I think that's really important because when you and I sit at a piano and we play, and we realize how when we play the fingers are cushioned and the wrist is cushioned, or they're not cushioned, that has a big impact on the tone as we play. This library has more dimension because every note in the sampling process is played by a real person. A great virtual piano needs to, of course, sound wonderful, but it also needs to feel wonderful under the fingers. VI Labs uses what they call the natural response method, where they carefully match the response of each key from each microphone in the sampling session and recreate that incredibly realistic feel using over 34,000 samples. So here's a chromatic scale. I'm going to go across the entire instrument, and I'm going to show you a variety of dynamics also. The Model D has all the great features and technology used and introduced in their popular Ravenscroft 275 and Modern U libraries, but they took this one even further. The interface is carefully laid out and it's intuitive to navigate. And most of the controls that you're going to need can be found right here on the main panel. Right in the center, you have 5 selectable mic setups with a 3-channel built-in mixer. There's also a great representation of each mic position. So let me show you around that a little bit. Right now, we have the close mics, the U87s, open, and you can see right here, you can see a little graphic representation of those two. That's really cool. Let's change these out. Well, here's our menu. We have 5 choices, U87, M49. Let's click those. And in the description, it says hammers. These are the hammer mics, and you can see in the interface right here, we have a nice little graphical representation of that, just to remind you of exactly where these were in the actual session. That's really wonderful. Let's go to the next one. All right, the player perspective. These are C414s, and again, you can see them pictured right here. You know, what's really cool about this is the 414 microphone it's gone through so many phases and developments, but these are the original 414s that were used to create this library, the EB model with the brass capsules. Those are pretty rare microphones these days, but they sound so good. And when you hear this setup, and we'll take a listen to it later, I think you'll agree. Next microphone choice. Okay, these are our side microphones, and they're the 4006s, and you can see them pictured here. They're just right outside the lid of the piano. And those are just a great stereo pair they're really versatile. You get a really nice sense of the instrument without being too close, too intimate, too percussive. I think those are one of my favorite choices of all the mics here. And let's go to the very last one. All right, these are the room microphones, and they're MK2H mics. They're kind of pictured out here. They're a little further away than the others. That's because actually in the room, they were much further away from the piano. So that's great. They were about 10 feet up in the air and some 6 feet or so outside the lid of the piano. So it's a really distant mic situation, and that's really great for a lot of classical stuff. If you're not familiar with the MK2H microphones, those are made by Schoeps, and Schoeps is a German company. They're known for creating really pristine, kind of, people would call them ruler flat microphones. They are super transparent, no color. What they hear is what you get. What the instrument was is what the microphone truly reproduces. And the MK2 capsules, those are omnidirectional capsules. So we get a really interesting and different choice with this room mic. We're going to do sound demos of each of those in just a little bit. We have all of our key controls on the left side of the interface over here. Pedal controls mainly on the right side of the interface. And if you look at the center bottom, you're also going to have some additional pedal controls. So looking here, first we have the option to turn on and load half pedal samples, muted strikes, Una Corda. And if we turn on, for example, half pedal and load that in, this is our minimum and maximum values, which we can change and set for where that half pedaling actually happens. Another interesting thing for both the muted strikes and the Una Corda samples, if you would, and we're going to get to more of this later on, but if you would like to solo those, we can click a solo button, and now everything we play will be using that Una Corda sample set or the muted strikes sample set. If we look just to the left of that area, you can see we have a sustain pedal is currently in this drop-down menu. You can click that. You can find all of your other pedal options, so sostenuto, Una Corda, and our muted strikes. And if we click each of those, you can see the MIDI assignment, and those are fully changeable. So for some reason it doesn't work on the default settings, you can easily change it there, or you can program it to be a different pedal. We'll talk more about that later on in the video. Right below that, we have pedal noise, and we have a drop-down menu that shows fixed and variable. So if I show you what fixed sounds like, we get one pedal noise for a depression. That's nice, it's not intrusive, and one for a release. That's great. And if you do have a continuous style pedal, you could choose the variable pedal noise. And now if I depress the pedal very slowly, that is almost a silent pedaling. And if I release very slowly, that's incredibly soft. And if I pedal more quickly, we get that more aggressive pedal down and release. Even with that quick release, there's a little bit of thud, which is very realistic. And right below the pedal noise type, we have a polyphony dropdown. And polyphony is set to default on open. And default is it's a really nice setting. We can play just about everything you could ever want to play, and it's gonna work for you. It's already optimized, it's wonderful. But let's say that you have a computer that's a little bit less powerful, and we need to limit the number of voices that are happening. We could go down to a medium or the minimum setting and still make great use of this instrument. Or if you really have a powerful computer and you want to explore everything that this library is capable of, you could go beyond to the full or maximum polyphony settings. Just be aware that if you do go to the full or max polyphony settings, that is going to increase your CPU usage. All right, looking over at the bottom left of our interface, this defaults to an imaging menu. And right now we can see that it's selected as left to right, which would be your player perspective. So the keys that are to your left sound like they're going to come out the left speaker. Keys to the right are going to come out the right speaker. We could flip that, and sometimes this would be referred to as audience perspective, right to left, or we could have a left only or right only option for our imaging. Now, right below that, we also have a width option. And this, at 0%, this is our standard width, the width that was recorded live in the sampling sessions. But we can both increase that width or decrease that width. And I think this library does a great job of actually summing to mono. Sounds really good. And if you've ever been in a true piano recording environment, having a stereo piano image that sums to mono is really difficult to do. And this still sounds great and full and warm. Oh, that's really nice. And if we go back to the default setting just to hear that again, it's lovely. And if we increase the width all the way, that could be really interesting to use in maybe a pop style song or something where we need an effect, but we have that option, and that's really great. Just to the right of our width control, we have a tone option, and this basically amounts to an EQ that you have right front and center without needing to go to the EQ panel that we're going to talk about in a second. This is basically a boost or cut around 4K, so think of it as a mid-high boost or cut, or sometimes it's that area that can start to get a little crunchy and a little bit harsh, and if we just get an immediate control over what that sounds like to really bring out that, or if we want to tame that down, and all of a sudden it gets really, really warm, and we can do all of that. It's a really powerful adjustment just in one knob. And just to the right of the tone control, we have our timbre knob, and this is a really interesting one because it's a really powerful color shaping tool. And what it does is it actually shifts the samples that are being triggered, and it shifts it by step. We have control of those steps. So if I turn the timbre to the left by 1, so this is -1, and I play middle C, what's actually happening behind the scenes is that we're getting the sample for C sharp, but lowered by a half step. So this tends to sound warmer and more full. We can exaggerate that more. Let's just shift this down to -3. So this would be 3 half steps. Or for example, this would be the E flat from the original sample set, but pitched down 3 semitones. And now if we play the same thing, this is still a C minor chord, but it's really warm sounding, right? We can go the opposite way and we get the opposite effect. So let's go up 3. So now we'd be triggering sample from A on middle C. You can immediately hear the difference in the color of that. Playing the same chord. It's interesting because this kind of simulates the difference between maybe a smaller grand piano. So as you turn timbre to the right or increase the number, we tend to get the tone of a smaller grand, or maybe like a baby grand. The bass is still really nice, but it isn't quite as rich. And if we go the other way, this is almost like increasing the size of our piano to being extra big, extra powerful, extra warm. Let's take this control all the way to an extreme, and we're going to dial it all the way to -12. So this would be an octave difference. So you can really hear that. Immediately, that's such a great inspirational tool, because to me, all of a sudden, this sounds like almost like bells in a cinematic scene. that's really neat. And it's so different from where we started, but it's right there just on one control. By the way, if you ever need a refresh about what any of these controls do, you can click on the handy information button. It says I with the little circle in it in the top right corner. Click on that, and then you can click on any of the text on the screen here. So for example, if we go back to the timbre knob and click on that word timbre, we get 2 paragraphs that really describe exactly what is going on with this feature. All of the words around the screen we can click on and get all of those descriptions. We're going to go through more of these in the video, but it's a great tool to have in case you need that extra bit of reference. Also in the bottom left of our screen, next to imaging, we have an EQ section. If we click EQ, it'll open up our EQ panel. Now notice that clicking EQ doesn't turn on the EQ panel. If you'd like to turn it on, you have to hit the on-off button, and we see that all of the rest of our controls in EQ go from a grayed out to a more vibrant color, right? Now, once that's on, we have a low shelf, we have a mid bell with an adjustable Q or an adjustable bandwidth, and we also have a high shelf. And these are really, really powerful, and they sound really good. The curves are very subtle, right? Nothing is really microscopic. It's not really fine or pointed if you're used to looking at a visual EQ, right? So these are all going to be very musical EQ options that we can work through. Next up, we're going to shift over to the bottom right of our interface, and we have a reverb panel. Once again, if we click the on button for the reverb, that illuminates our options, our drop-down menu, and our dial. But also there's so much more here. So if we hit this plus button, this expands all of the rest of our reverb controls. And this becomes a really powerful tool when we can control the time of each of our settings, a pre-delay, the width of the reverb itself, which is different than the width of the instrument or the samples that we have on the left side of the screen. So the width of the reverb, of course, low dampening and high dampening, this becomes a really powerful tool where we're not just kind of relegated to a couple basic reverbs that are within a particular plugin, but we have a whole bunch of really nice sounds that are really customizable with these options that are initially hidden, right? And of course, the amount knob, this controls how much reverb we're adding. We can drag it all the way to 0, and now you see it says dry 100, wet 0. That means it's only the dry signal, only the original signal with no verb added, even though this section is turned on. As we increase that, we'll get more and more reverb, right? And we can increase that beyond to get only the wet signal or only the reverb signal with none of the original dry. After you've finished using your reverb or setting things up, you can always come back, click this arrow, and collapse that panel again. I do want to point out that we can have the reverb panel open and the EQ panel open at the same time, and we can see all of those adjustments right in front of us, and that's really, really handy as you're fine-tuning a tone that you really like here. The preset menu is near the top left of our interface, and many presets come already included for you. Presets that are labeled effects only don't load or change mics, so they're going to load in really quickly and give you a lot of versatility very, very fast. Presets that are called mics and effects, they do include mic selections and mixes, so they do take a little bit longer to load in. Here's a few examples. We're going to jump back to the FX only. And this isn't changing our default microphone. It's still on the U87 selection. We're going to go to the Bright Punch, the first one in our menu. And such a big difference already from where we were just with the default load in, right? Really nice, really punchy, right? Still with the same mics. Now, only changing the effects, not the mics. Let's scroll over to dark warmth. Of course, you're gonna expect something very different here. That's really nice. It's so different from what we just heard, just with effects. Let's jump over to some microphone and effects selections. And for something completely different, we're going to load in the complete classical preset. Okay, let's talk through a little bit of what actually just loaded in here. So we have a set of room mics that are now up, that are mixed high, +3. We have our side microphones that are also loaded up, and the close U87 mics. So 3 sets of mics pre-mixed for you. Also, all of the half pedal samples got loaded in, and the Una Corda samples got loaded in. There's also a reverb included in the preset and an EQ that's already been done for you. You may have also noticed the sympathetic polyphony increased, pedal noise decreased, right? All this stuff got changed. What does it sound like? Right, it puts you right in the middle of a concert hall. It sounds really, really nice. No longer does it sound like that really close mic'd piano that's really intimate, or that rock piano, right? But we've got this sense of distance and bloom. So all of a sudden you can really see back to back here between the first effects we looked at and this first preset with microphones. There's a huge amount of range and versatility that this instrument is capable of. Let's take a look at one more preset. All right, again, let's take a quick look through what changed. We have different microphones that are up. So only 2 microphones instead of 3 are currently loaded in. The Hammers microphones, the M49s, and our close under the lid microphones, the U87s. So this should be a relatively warm and intimate sound just from seeing that, right? Our sympathetic polyphony went back down to 10. We no longer have half pedal loaded in or the Una Corda. We have a different reverb. And interestingly here on the imaging, we have a bit of a smaller stereo image, so -15% with a tone and a timbre shift. There's an EQ. And if we expand the reverb, I think this is really interesting. The width on the left side is narrowed, but the width of the reverb is broadened. That's a really interesting mixing concept, and it's preloaded for you right here. Let's see what this one sounds like. So there you go. There's another huge difference between just 2 of these presets, and big difference between the mic presets and the effects only presets. VI Labs used nearly 40 mics in the sampling session for this instrument. And of those, they narrowed it down to their top 5 stereo choices. And these mic setups offer a lot of diversity and character. And I think they cover most of the popular ways to mic up a concert grand. They're all going to be phase aligned. So not only do they collapse to mono very nicely, which we heard earlier, but they also mix with one another really well, which we heard some of those presets. And they deliver a really clean and a high-end tone, minimal noise, and there's no loss of quality. So why don't we go through each of these mics separately, and then we're going to talk a little bit about mixing them. We've done a lot of demoing of the default microphone that loads in, and that's the close U87s, but just as a refresh of what that sounds like, I'm going to try to play the same basic example for you so we get the same chords or the same chord progression going through each one. So sticking with C minor. Okay, and let's move over to the next selection, the Hammers. Okay, let's take a listen to the 414s. Nice. Moving over to the side microphones, the 4006s. And last but not least, our room mics. The volume sliders next to each mic selection go from +3, as you can see here, +3, all the way down to -20, and they default to 0 when they're loaded in. Now, these faders can also be adjusted live and in real time as you're playing or as you're listening back without introducing artifacts or glitching. So I'm going to play a little quick improv in, and then I'm going to loop it, and I'm going to show in real time how these sliders can be used just like the faders on your console. Okay, let's load in a couple other microphones. All right, I'm going to start us with playback of just the mics that we recorded in. These others are going to be down at their full -20 value, so almost inaudible, let's say. And if we hear back what this sounds like, and I'm going to move these faders around. So fading in hammers. If we fade out the originals, let's bring in the room mics. That's going to loop back around, and now let's start with just the room mics open. It's that really open, expansive sound. Let's add in the warm U87. Just until we start to hear a little bit. Let's look for a little bite. Now that's really nice. And now we have a really three-dimensional mix. We were able to do that all in real time, just as if you had these microphones open in a recording session. One last thing, if you do use a control surface or hardware for mixing, these faders can also be assigned MIDI CC values. So you can have that control right at your fingertips and not just with your mouse or your trackpad. Oh, that sounds good. The Modern D includes both pedal down and harmonic key pedal up resonances. And very importantly, these are all sample-based and they're multi-layered. This is one of the things, big things that I think sets this library and the others from VI Labs apart. There's no math running in the background or under the hood that's going to try to interpret what the sympathetic resonance is, or it's going to try to guess what it is or predict what it is. No, it's actually sampled here, which creates a much more complex and evolving sustained tone. So the resonance amount for both of these types is fully adjustable, and sympathetic resonance has its own polyphony setting also. So we can see that on the screen here. You can raise polyphony to simulate the truest resonance on an acoustic grand, and this goes all the way up to 40. And if you're low on CPU resources, or if you just want a more simple sound with a little less resonance, we can decrease that, of course, down to 5. Personally, I love the default setting of 10, but if you really want an effect or you really are looking for the most resonant sound you could find, raising it could be great. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what this actually sounds like. Let's jump over to pedal resonance and increase that all the way to its maximum. Now, I'm going to play a big chord first in the lower register and then put the pedal down and listen to what happens. We get that nice bloom of sound. Everything just expands and becomes even more multi-dimensional, right? Let's take a different chord and listen to that one more time. That's really nice, right? That is actually what a real acoustic piano does. When you have created all of these strings that are vibrating in the instrument, and then you open up everything else in the instrument, that all starts to resonate and to vibrate. And that sounds super, it sounds a little bit more than real, increased to +6, but that's just so we could really talk about it. But at 0, at the normal default setting, that still sounds really nice, right? Here's another thing that this Modern D does so well. Let's play a chord, and I'm going to play the same chord, B flat here. We'll play it with the pedal down already, and then I'm going to release the pedal but sustain the chord with fingers. So here we go, pedal down. You see how that changed? Let's reverse that. Okay, so let's say this is a trick that a lot of classical pianists that play modern classical repertoire use. If we silent press a whole bunch of keys, I'm going to increase the polyphony on this, just so we really get a sense of what's going on. Now, I'm not going to use the pedal. This is all about resonance of these keys that are depressed. I'm going to play some notes, single staccato pitches. We have all of that ringing because that would actually happen on an acoustic instrument. Here's a little bit of a different thing to try. If we silent press just 3 pitches, and I'm using C, G, C, the octave and a fifth here. If we strike keys that would sympathetically vibrate with this, like the other keys, an octave higher, even the third, you're going to get a little bit of that. That would be vibrating in these 3. If you strike keys that wouldn't sympathetically vibrate with those, we should get nothing or almost nothing. So on C sharp, that's good because that's real. But if we go back and play C, it's right there. That's exactly how a real piano would respond. Now that's an interesting test and to show off just what is happening, but every single note you play as you play with the pedal down and with the pedal up, that's happening all over the place. And that's one of the things that gives this library so much richness, so much depth, so much dimension. It makes it sound so real. So in addition to this, on a real acoustic piano, most of these notes have dampers, right? And a damper is something that, as you release the key, it stops the sound from happening. As you go up to the high registers of pianos, and they're all a little different, there will be a point where the dampers stop. Here, G has a damper. G sharp does not have a damper on the instrument that was sampled. But check this out. If I put the pedal down and I play these undampened notes, and I'll just stick with C. Listen to all that ringing, because that's the whole rest of the instrument continuing to resonate. And if I release, let me play that again, and I'll release the pedal. Right? And that's not because these notes at the top end are being dampened. That's because it's the resonance of the whole rest of the instrument that is being dampened when the pedal comes down. Let's talk about the Una Corda pedal. On an acoustic grand, the left pedal is often called the shift pedal or the Una Corda. And what this pedal does is it shifts the entire action to the right so that when you play, the hammer is striking the string with a different part than what's typically used. This produces a more mellow tone since the felt on the top of the hammer hasn't been compressed as much. But sometimes, and especially on concert grands, the Una Corda can be set up to shift the action far enough to the right that one of the 3 strings isn't struck at all, and the top felt of the hammer is also softer and less compressed. And that's how this Una Corda was sampled. So first and foremost, again, these are entirely new and different samples than the rest of the library without the Una Corda engaged. It isn't an algorithm that's trying to replicate the Una Corda mathematically. It isn't the same samples as the left pedal up, Una Corda up, but samples that have been reduced in volume or EQ'd to be warmer. No, they're all different samples. And you can really hear the difference because the tone is dramatically changed when you set up an Una Corda like this. So let me just play a few single notes and some chords for you that really show that off. So we'll stick with the same B minor here. So without the Una Corda engaged, with it engaged, big tonal difference. Listen to one of these pitches. How about B flat below middle C? And without the pedal, let's play a little bit of an arpeggio and also show that off. So here is an arpeggio going up, a run without the Una Corda engaged. And with. Really hear that big, big difference. And it's not just more mellow, but it's really a completely different tone. That's what the Una Corda pedal is all about, especially for classical pianists. It's a tone control pedal. So it's almost like we get a whole second instrument to play and experience and shape, right? And of course, you don't have to play a phrase with it off and a phrase with it on. You can be in the middle of playing. If you want to brighten that up. And then darken it. Right? That's really nice. Now, of course, if you do want to use the Una Corda at all times, and let's say you don't have a pedal to control it with, you could come over to the interface and click the solo button, and it'll keep it soloed for the entire time that you're playing, and you could deselect that when you want to go back to the regular full strike samples, what would be called tre corda in music notation. The Modern D offers full control of up to 4 pedals at once. The sustain pedal includes full re-pedal capability. So what that means is if I play a chord or if I'm playing in the middle and I release the pedal and catch it again quickly, I'm going to be able to catch all of those sustains and everything that was ringing before. So take a listen to this, pedal down. And you could hear I changed the pedal, but it still caught a great deal of what was happening. That can be an effect, and it's also something that a lot of classical pianists need and use all the time when they're playing big repertoire on a concert grand piano like this. This also applies to repedaling notes that weren't initially pedaled. So for example, if we play and release a chord and then catch it with the pedal, we're still going to get a partial sustain. So like this. Right? So you can hear that most of that has been dried out and has been dampened by the dampers in the piano, but we've caught just enough of it. We can continue to let that ring if we want to. The sustain pedal also works with a continuous piano style pedal to control the adjustable and sample-based half pedal feature. So let's take a listen to just what this is. Let me try to find that first. As I release the pedal, I'm going to find that point where I get partial dampening. And then if I keep the pedal there, you can hear there's just that little bit of ring. And what this is actually simulating is that a damper pedal on a piano it's not an on-off pedal, right? It's fully continuous. And there is a point, there are actually many points at which the dampers start to come in contact with the strings. And when that starts to happen, we get a whole variety of different tones. So this is really great because we can get that partial sustain and partial dampening sound that we would be looking for on an acoustic piano. And if we can hold the pedal there, we can also pedal through this and what would be called in classical playing flutter pedaling, which would be going from full dampening to half pedaling and back and forth and back and forth. You can even achieve that sound with this library. That's really, really powerful. You also have complete control of the range of the half pedal. using these min and max controls that we mentioned earlier. So if you want a bigger range to help you find that point, you can change the minimum to a lower number and the maximum to a higher number. Or if you really, really want a very, very fine point where those dampers, where we hear that half pedal happening, you can make this an even smaller adjustment. By default, the left pedal is going to be your Una Corda pedal, but the remaining 3 pedal controls we have to talk about, the Una Corda, the sostenuto, and muted strikes, they can be assigned to any pedal or to any other MIDI CC value. So for example, I only have a 2-pedal unit that's compatible with my controller, but if I wanted sostenuto instead of Una Corda, I could program my left pedal for sostenuto and use it the same way. So if I come over here to the interface, first I'm going to change our Una Corda pedal to just something different. So 100's an easy number. It was CC67. I'm going to go back to the sostenuto pedal and make it CC67. Now, on my 2-pedal unit, I have the right pedal, which is my damper or sustain pedal, still. And now the left pedal is a sostenuto pedal, which will hold only the notes that I have depressed. So if I play a C minor, sostenuto pedal, those pitches will continue to ring, but everything else will stay dry, dampened, right? That's exactly the way a sostenuto pedal works on an acoustic grand. Let's say that we have our sostenuto pedal set up and we want our sustain pedal, but we also want control of our muted strikes and we're just out of pedals. We don't have another pedal to take care of that or to trigger that. There's an easy solution for that, and that is going to be to use our mod wheel to take care of changing the tone, right? So first of all, let's load our muted strikes in. Now, if we come over in our drop-down menu to muted strikes, instead of CC70, let's change this to 1 for our mod wheel. Now, with our mod wheel down, we're still getting the regular tone. Shift the mod wheel up. We have our muted strikes. We still have, let's turn that off for a second. We still have sostenuto. So let's say we want to play this chord. Change to muted strikes. That's pretty cool. We have all that control and of course, still damper. Which is really interesting because now we're hearing on the muted strikes, but we're also hearing all that sympathetic resonance that we talked about earlier. You can hear all that building up. That's really cool. The response of a piano is just as important as the sound itself, and getting exactly what you tell it through your playing is crucial in order to connect to the instrument. Customizing response to any controller, any playing style, or for any effect can be achieved with the MIDI panel. We can navigate to that with this little graph-looking icon. Click on that and we get the MIDI panel. There are 2 different components that affect the MIDI response of virtual pianos. We have velocity levels, which relate to the timbre change from soft to hard key strikes, right? From warm pianos to those really aggressive fortes. And then there's also the gain curve, which is on the right side, which controls the amount of volume through the entire velocity range. It's how a virtual instrument interprets the incoming MIDI data and decides what timbre and volume to output based on the curves and settings we have selected. Now, this specialized MIDI panel gives you discrete split control of both components. Let's take a look at the left side here first, the MIDI response curve. And right now, by default, it's perfectly linear, right? And if I play, you can see at the bottom of the screen, MIDI in and MIDI out. This shows on a single note basis, the MIDI in is the same as the MIDI out. So that means the velocity sensed by the controller is also the velocity that's going to be triggered in the sample library. Let's start by using the bend knob to control this. If we increase the bend knob, we're going to get higher velocities more quickly. So at a softer dynamic, it's going to trigger a much higher velocity. So you can hear right now MIDI in 59, 53, but our output is a much higher number. That means we're going to get that sound of a forte or that really more biting attack. We don't have to play very hard to get there. Let's take the bend in the opposite direction. That's a really extreme curve. Let's take it all the way down the other direction. Same thing. Now, if I play about the same dynamic in the 60s, MIDI in, you can see those are in the 60s to 70s, but our MIDI out data is very soft. Subsequently, what we're hearing, that is a very, very mellow piano-like tone. The bend knobs are a great place to start to adjust this library to your controller so that you feel like it's responding the way that a real piano would feel, because every controller is a little bit different. But in addition to that, you can come right up here into this graph and you can create your own curve, adjusting things however you would like. So we can create, here's an interesting little scoop. And let's say we see all those jagged edges. Come over here to the smooth button, click that a couple times, and voila, we have a very smooth curve. We don't have to worry about drawing it perfectly in with our mouse or our trackpad. I'm going to click reset to put that back to our default. Another really interesting thing is we have these arrows on the bottom left and the top right corner. Let's take this bottom arrow and let's drag it to the right. And I'm going to go very extreme just to demonstrate what's happening here. So what I'm doing right now is, that said 50 on the display, right? That means if I play anything, if I trigger anything below 50 on my controller, what I'm actually going to get out is the response of 1, which you can see in the top left corner of that little square MIDI response. So if I play something quiet, you can see the MIDI in here is 11, 25, 36, 34, but the output is all 1. It's always 1 because we've eliminated the curve completely. What if I take this other arrow? I'm going to drag it up to 5. Now everything under 50, I'm going to get a MIDI response of 5. A very, very, very quiet playing of that pitch. You might also be hearing, as my input changes slightly from a softer 31 in to a louder 51, 47, there's actually a slight change in the dynamic. There's a slight change in the volume, and that's because it's still following the gain response on the right side of our screen. So there's still small changes happening there, but the color of the tone is always the same. Let's hit reset and put that back. Let's shift our focus to the top right corner of the MIDI response. This can be really useful. Let's say you have a controller that is really sensitive and just all the time it's sounding like this is too loud and too harsh all the time. We're triggering those samples that are too aggressive. If we take this right side arrow, we can decrease that. And now we're basically limiting the response of the library to the samples that are at 109 or 108, 107. So if I play now, my MIDI out response is lower than what it was before. The in, we can see I'm hitting very high velocities, but the output is being limited. So let's say maybe you're working on a project where you don't ever want that really fortissimo aggression in the sound of the piano, but you still want to be able to get into the playing and sink in a little bit more. This is a great place to adjust the response, because now I can really sink in and play, and I'm never going to reach those really aggressive and a little bit brighter fortissimos, right? Everything is going to stay nice and warm. What if you have the opposite problem? And what if your controller is just, it's impossible to play fortissimo. No matter how much force you put in, you're not getting there. That's where this other arrow comes into play. If we shift this to the left, now what we're saying is at velocities of 100 on our controller, we're going to actually trigger 127. So I can play anything 100 and over will trigger our maximum velocity sample. So if it's just way too difficult for you to reach those dynamics and you really want them, we can get them by using the curve this way. You can think about the gain curve that's on the right side of the screen as something like a natural compressor. Now, especially since this library is extremely powerful and dynamic, and acoustic pianos are notoriously difficult to compress in a transparent way. So if you lessen the angle of this gain curve, you're effectively going to be applying compression to your sound, but you're not going to be altering the actual transient response like a traditional compressor will. So this is going to sound very, very natural, but we're going to get a lot of control over our overall volume. Once again, let's start with the bend knob, but this time on the gain response side. As we push the knob up, what we're going to find is we reach our maximum volume much sooner, right? And it's gotten quite difficult to play extremely quietly. So in effect, all of our quiet dynamics that are still preserved in our color on the MIDI response side of the curve, right? The color is still preserved, but we have raised the volume of all of that playing. But it's done in such a natural sounding way. So if I play very softly, and then I really want to lean into this, that sounds really natural, right? And that would be a really difficult thing to do with that big of a dynamic change if you were working with traditional acoustic piano. Let's do the opposite. We're going to reset and bend in the opposite direction. Let's do a very extreme example. Now, you can hear the color of this has that forte sound, right? It's got that brightness, but it's been compressed to a very low dynamic, right? And if I really push hard, I can still attain those really, really high volumes, but it's gotten much more difficult to do that. So this is acting like a compressor, but in kind of the opposite way, where now we can really access those brighter tones, but have them be nice and soft. If this is very new to you and you're a little bit confused, that's okay, because the sync bend option is your friend. So if you click that and enable it, now both of these bend options are going to work in conjunction with one another. And this can really help you dial in at least a starting point for how you and your controller interact. And it can do it in a quick and easy way where you don't have to spend a lot of time here figuring out a custom preset just for yourself. You can get a great deal and you can make a lot of progress just by looking at the sync bend option. Many presets for different curve types are included right here, and I'd encourage you to explore the possibilities, because with these tools, you can be sure that you're going to get the most out of your controller and the Modern D for the perfect response, or to alter the piano's character really significantly. So let's explore just a couple of these presets. Let's look at Light Touch 1. So I need to put in less effort with Light Touch 1 to achieve those greater colors, right? The more forte colors, and also have a little bit greater volume. It's very easy to play in that range. Let's look at an opposite preset, like Heavy Touch 1. You can see how the curves are changing, right? This is going to feel... The best way to describe this to a pianist is it feels like a heavier action. It feels like I have to put more into the piano to get the same result that I just got from the other preset. You might like that, and it might work really well for your controller. You might also like some of these presets for different types of projects. Let's look at a compressed preset. So here we have the MIDI response on the left side is still completely, let's say, natural. We have our entire resolution from 1 to 127 of velocities, but our gain response has been lowered. It's still linear, but it's compressed. So the harder I lean into this, that is nowhere near as loud as it would be as if that gain response went all the way up to the top right corner, right? It's being compressed, and I can still play softly. Sounds lovely, but our overall dynamic range has been limited. Now, some people might say, well, that's not a good thing, but truly it is, because the dynamic range of a concert grand is extreme. There are notes, particularly of this piano that were sampled, that had a difference of 50 decibels between the softest playing and the loudest playing. And that's a huge difference. If we remember, every 10 decibels is double the volume, right? 50 decibels of dynamic range is a massive amount. And anytime we're recording something, we have to figure out ways of compressing that into a package that we can actually listen to comfortably. Otherwise, what we get is softs that are inaudible and then loud sounds that just blow us away if we're listening through speakers, right? But the really great thing about this library is that the actual acoustic response has been maintained. The character of the instrument is still there. It's like working with that real piano that has this massive dynamic range. And now it's up to us as the user to figure out, well, how do we need to control that for our particular project, right? And that opens up so many possibilities because there are so many ways of dealing with that problem, right? We can compress in different ways. This is a great solution because here we can limit that dynamic range from being so massive, and we can bring it down to something that's a little bit more controlled, and we can do it in a completely transparent way, which if you don't have some extraordinarily expensive studio tools, that can be almost impossible to do any other way. The Modern D is the largest and most deeply sampled piano library ever created by VI Labs. It's made of over 34,000 samples, a massive 118 gigabytes worth of wave data that's compressed with the lossless FLAC format to an astonishing 18 gigabyte file, which gives you fast loading, a small hard drive footprint, and low CPU usage. I have to mention that when I was playing all of the selections for the Modern D trailer video that I hope you've seen, I used this library on an internal drive of a 10-year-old laptop. I was using increased polyphony, all three full mics in mix, the Una Corda pedal, half pedal. I was running, let's say, full gas with the library in a way less than ideal setup, and it never glitched. That is how optimized this library is. Additional features include sampled key and pedal noises with velocity sensitivity. If we listen for key noise, it defaults to the off position. And now listen as this comes on. All of the extra thudding in the action. Okay, we also have pedal noises, and the pedal noises, if I just increase them here, up 12 decibels. Turned up that much, they're pretty loud, but we can agree that they're there. And those were the fixed pedal noises, and we demoed the variable ones earlier in the video. We also have precision release samples, including true staccatos. So if I play some staccato stuff for you, you can really hear that the piano continue to ring just like it's supposed to. That's really great. We also have silent strike samples, so you can press a key but trigger no note. Now, in order to demo this, I'm going to increase the gain in my DAW a significant amount. This is up more than 30 decibels, but just so we can hear what happens at MIDI velocity 1. What you're actually hearing there is the damper releasing from the strings, but no hammer strike of the note. That's a really interesting and cool feature. There's also a tuning panel with many included presets. That looks like the tuning fork selection here. And here are many, many presets, lots of stuff for you to play around with. There is also micro tuning support, and there's even more. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's an interactive help menu to help guide you through this interface. Remember, this is the eye with the circle, right? So you can learn each and every feature as you go. You just need to click that eye to open, and then click any of these names in white around the interface and get a detailed description of each one. I'm Charles Sympathetic, and I've been happy to be your guide through the Modern D today. That's all for now. Visit vilabsaudio.com to grab your copy of the Modern D and experience what this incredible virtual concert grand can do for you and for your music. Thanks so much for watching.